Thanksgiving is coming, and we're gonna need some bourbon. It's time to be thankful. I think we should be thankful for bourbon. Today I'm gonna walk you through 7 bourbons that I think you'll need on Thanksgiving. Now, don't hear me wrong out of the gates. I'm not saying you should have multiple pours of 7 bourbons. I just think 7 bourbons can play a role in your Thanksgiving Day celebration. Before we get into that, what am I drinking right now? Well, this is pour number 1, and I'll probably pour some of it back. Not that this is bad, it's just that I'm going to have another pour later in the show. This is actually quite good. This is Belle Meade Cask Strength Reserve. Their initial release was Cask Strength. Now they just call this Belle Meade Reserve. It's 108.3 proof, which is basically cask strength. This is MGP stuff in the 6 to 8 year range, and it's really good. Belle Meade does a great job of picking, selecting, and blending barrels to make dope whiskey from MGP. Apparently their own stuff is pretty good too. Belle Meade it comes from the Nelson Greenbrier Distillery in Tennessee. And apparently their whiskey is quite good, but I have not had it yet. So one day. All right, let's put this away. Let's talk about Thanksgiving bourbons. So you wake up in the morning. It's Thanksgiving Day. You're jacked. You're ready. Ready for food, ready for football, ready for whiskey. Well, I mean, first thing you need to do is some oral cleansing. That's just a rule for humanity. When you wake up in the morning, you got to clean out the gunk. It smells bad in there. And I recommend for that Jack Daniels. A little mouthwash. Jack wash. Wow. I mean, you should brush your teeth, obviously, but whiskey can kill germs. It is a high enough proof to do that. Now, it has to be above, I think, 120 proof to be like sterilizing. But I mean, hey, like an 80 proofer will still do. And you don't want to spit out your good whiskey. And Jack's not the worst. So it makes a decent mouthwash substitute, Jack Daniels. So you've already started the day on a decent note. You've gotten some whiskey tasting in right after you brush your teeth. You're ready for the next thing. What is the next thing? Well, it's breakfast. Now, bourbon with breakfast is not socially acceptable, but on Thanksgiving, we're going to let it slide. And I'm trying to think, what whiskey would pair well with breakfast? Well, it's something lightish, but I never go below 90 proof, don't want to. Not in the stuff I drink. But I want something that's going to be sweet and generally help me ease into the day on the very rare occasion that I might have a bourbon with breakfast. So I'm going to go Buffalo Trace. I mean, it's just easy. It's easy to drink. Tastes great. It's amazing. If you haven't had it, you can probably find it. That's one of the other things I wanted to put on this list of Thanksgiving bourbons is that you need to be able to find them. Most of us should be able to find a bottle of Buffalo Trace. And it just reminds me of Thanksgiving because it's got a buffalo on it. Next up, we're thinking about football. Now, this has not been a great year for football. I haven't watched a complete football game all year. It just feels weird with COVID and no fans and all that. That said, Thanksgiving Day, probably going to watch some football. That's kind of, there's a lot of machismo in football. I mean, when I think about football and Thanksgiving, it kind of feels masculine. And, that's okay. So I'm going to go with a masculine whiskey, a whiskey that really carries itself with some gruffness, and that would be, I'm not ready for it. I got to dig it out. Booker's. Booker's is a bourbon that will just light you up. So I'm not recommending you pound a ton of this as you watch some football. This is 2020 batch 2, 63.25% alcohol by volume. And what's interesting about Booker's, particularly the releases over the last few years, is they're all in the 6 to 7 year range. And I would be like, wow, that's kind of young for such an intense whiskey. Booker's is crazy intense, like all kinds of flavors, spicy, oaky, hot. It's a bourbon that doesn't mess around. So if you're watching football and you're feeling gruff, then Booker's is probably right up your alley. Because you kind of eased into the day 2 with Buffalo Trace, you can afford to step it up a notch now. Take a little higher proof. If you didn't know, Booker's is the highest end of the Jim Beam small batch whiskeys, which includes Booker's, Baker's, Knob Creek, and Basil Hayden, which you know that I do not much care for Basil Hayden. And Booker's is also the most highly sought after out of all of those. It tends to get hunted, so it may be a little bit difficult to track down Booker's, but I think you still stand a good shot. There's probably one sitting on the shelf around town. All right, so you made it through the morning, and I'm recommending you have a solid breakfast and a solid lunch if you plan to actually ingest all of these whiskeys that I'm talking about in my show today. You've had a pour of Buffalo Trace, you've had a pour of Booker's. Okay, now it's time to fire up the grill. And let's take a break from the drinking bourbon. Often I run out of lighter fluid. I'm just not very prepared. So when I'm doing grilling and or smoking, I tend to utilize the tools that are around my house to make an effective grill/smoke thing. One of the things I do is once the charcoal is going for the grill, when I need to get it nice and hot, I'll take my wife's blow dryer outside and just shoot the charcoal chimney with the blow dryer. If you've never tried that, it's the fastest way to heat charcoal. You're welcome. But taking a step back, if you don't have any lighter fluid, well, one thing that will actually taste better in your food than lighter fluid that you can use to start your charcoal and or your smoker is bourbon. Again, I don't recommend using a good bourbon for this. So take an absolute garbage bourbon, like Kentucky Tavern, and throw some of that on your charcoal, or throw it in a bundle of newspaper, light that sucker up, set it underneath your charcoal, and you're going to be good to go. And I recommend Kentucky Tavern because, man, it is bad. It is very bad. I would generally say respect the bottom shelf unless what's on that bottom shelf is Kentucky Tavern. Kentucky Tavern is the bottom shelf offering for 1792 Barton. So it's the Ride bourbon from Barton Distillery, which is the same stuff that goes into 1792, but the 1792 at least is somewhat curated. I think Kentucky Tavern is, they're like, oh, we just got to get this barrel out because, man, it is rough. It'll pickle your grits. So don't drink it. Use it to start your grill. Use it to strip warts off the mule, that kind of thing. But once that grill is going, like let's say an hour in, charcoal's heated up, you're ready to go. We're gonna smoke some meat. When you are smoking meat, I recommend a cheap, fairly budget-friendly option to go with that experience. An undelicate yet also delicious whiskey, and that would be Old Tub. Now, generally, I'm not much of a Jim Beam fan, but I've already mentioned Booker's as a great Thanksgiving whiskey. Also, Old Tub, which is a limited release, but it's still on shelves in Milwaukee. $20 to $22, bottled in bond, unfiltered. Well, I mean, all whiskey is filtered somewhat. You got to get the charcoal chunks out of there, but non-chill filtered Old Tub. Which this stuff is pretty good. I don't know if it's just the fact that they changed up the filtering on it and maybe did some good curation of some standard Jim Beam barrels, but the 100 proof, it's like oily, viscous, smoky. In my opinion, it's going to pair perfectly with smoked meat or with grilling. So if you got the bird in the smoker, or you're untraditional, let's say, and you're not going turkey for main course, maybe you got a ham up in there, some ham chops. Hit yourself with some Old Tub. You're going to like it. And this would be a respect the bottom shelf moment. At $20 to $22, I think this is definitely bottom shelf price, but a pretty killer flavor profile. All right. The meat has been smoked. So now I need to dump some of my Belle Meade back in here, because I don't want it to go to waste. And the alcohol content is going to kill my spit germs. This is still perfectly good to drink, although now my guests who come over to drink whiskey with me might think twice about me pouring them something. So you put the meat on the table. it's entree time. It's main course. It's what do I have while having a meal? What bourbon am I going to go with while I'm stuffing my face? Well, there can only be one choice, only one brand actually. There's many choices within that brand, but we're gonna say the brand first, and you've already guessed it. It's Wild Turkey. You can't not have Wild Turkey on Thanksgiving. I mean, those two were made for each other. I'm going to recommend, because this is a special day, that you go above Wild Turkey 101, which is a really solid everyday drinker. Wild Turkey 101 is pretty great. It's a little bit funky, but it's really solid, like balanced age, good sweetness and oak. Yeah, it's a good bourbon. I'm going to recommend you stay away from the high proof rare breed, because if you're eating a mixture of things like salt and sugar, which you probably are on your Thanksgiving Day table, when you go from something really sweet to the rare breed, say you take a bite of sweet potato casserole, then you go to the rare breed's going to light you on fire. You're not going to get much other than big alcohol up in your grill, because you can't taste the sweetness in the bourbon when you're coming directly from the sweet potato casserole. I also recommend you don't go super high end. I've got a few Master's Keep over there, Wild Turkey Master's Keep. Don't do that while you're eating. Again, the flavors from the food don't always go great with the bourbon. What you need is something that's really sweet, medium proof, something that's going to taste really good on its own and complement the food, and something that's not going to have cost you multiple hundreds of dollars. And for me, that's going to be Wild Turkey's single barrel product, Kentucky Spirit. This you can get around me for $48. It is 50.5% alcohol by volume, so it's that 101 proof range, but it's much more highly curated and vetted than Wild Turkey's 101 $23 bottle. So this is the star of our show. This is the star of Thanksgiving, in my opinion. I think it's the perfect turkey product to go with the meal because it's robust. It is sweet. It's got a decent amount of smoky char, so it's going to pair well with your meats. So sweetness is going to make it tolerable if you're eating it after a bite of sweet potato casserole. The oaky char is going to make it pair really, really well with your meat. The budget's going to make you not feel bad if you have a particular food bourbon pairing that doesn't work out too well for you. And then when the meal is done and you just got a little bit left in your glass and you lean back and sip it, it's going to hit just perfect. I mean, it's hitting perfect now. And it's doing it for me. This is a great bourbon. And it just sits on shelves. This is the amazing thing about Wild Turkey. Barrel proof Wild Turkey, rare breed, 6, 8, 12 year, it's in that 6 to 12 year range as a blend, but it sits on shelves. Stag Junior is in that 6 to 12 year old range, barrel proof Buffalo Trace. You can't find it. I mean, secondary value on that thing is $150. Elijah Craig barrel proof 12-year-old Heaven Hill, it's $70 to $80 now, whereas rare breed is $40 to $50. And then you go to their single barrel, which this stuff is just as good as rare breed, just slightly lower proof, and it's a single barrel, amazing whiskey, $40 to $50, and you can find it all day long. Why would you not buy this? It's fantastic. Buy this whiskey for Thanksgiving. Now I have one more whiskey left. And this would be one of my favorite whiskeys for celebrating something. The meal's done. All of the football has been watched. You have contributed nothing to society for this day. And that's okay, because it's a day about being thankful for what we have and celebrating. That's okay. Now it's time for dessert. Time to wrap up the day, the nightcap. Well, I'm going to go with a Four Roses single barrel. Now, this Four Roses single barrel is the barrel proof version, and if you have these, great. You may not be able to find them because, they're store picks. Stores have to pick these single barrels, and you have to be lucky enough to get one. But if you go to the store and just get the everyday Four Roses single barrel option, it's $40. sometimes less, sometimes a little bit more, but it's generally 7 or 8 year old OBSV recipe, 100 proof, Four Roses single barrel. That's, oh man, it's really, really good. And they tend to be sweet and fruity and creamy. Like when I think of dessert flavors in a bourbon, I think of Four Roses OBSV single barrels. So that's another one of those bourbons that I'm comforted when I can't find something like a Weller, or maybe I can't find Booker's in my area, or I can't find Stag Junior. I know that I've still got Four Roses single barrels, and I'll take that every day. So you've come to the end of the day. It was the best Thanksgiving you've ever had. What do you think of my list? If you disagree with any of my recommendations, throw it down in the comments. Hit me up if you have any ideas for my show, questions, comments, ideas. Again, just throw them in the comments. I've got a lot more videos coming in the pipeline. It's going to be a fun holiday season, so be sure to like this video and subscribe. Bell notification, the whole 9 yards. Make sure you can stay up to speed with what I'm dropping. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to keep it neat.